Well, I know you've probably been welcome to Saratoga multiple times, but let me just do it one more time. On behalf of Saratoga, as a trustee at Skidmore College, I was also for a while on the foundation board at Empire State. Saratoga is actually in many ways, one of the really influential cities that has been involved, and I'm going to argue for over a century, in distance distributed, alternative, and evolving learning. A little bit of history, that in the late 1890s, there was a meeting held here in Saratoga that brought together the presidents of all the liberal arts colleges in the United States to try to come up with a unified concept of what a core high school curriculum was. And their view was that it would create mobility. That, in other words, as students started to perhaps go to two different high schools, even when students went to colleges if they moved, and certainly, Alan as a current president and my friend Jim Hall, who I asked, we saw him on Friday night, I said, hey, drop by in the morning. Empire State played a very critical role in proving out what a publicly funded institution could do to serve an alternative population in some alternative ways. And back when my wife and I were considering where to live in 1994, we were in Boston. I was president of Ziff Davis, PC Magazine, and the like. One of the cities was Saratoga, and one of the reasons was that Empire State was here, as that Skidmore as a liberal arts residential college, RPI in our backyards, Excelsior College, and that there was all of the seeds of a wonderful place to be. So I hope that you will harvest some of those, that you'll enjoy that. For those of you who are coming to visit this afternoon, we're going to be very gracious and mildly distracted because at 4:19, one of my horses runs in Finger Lake. So my other staff will give you a tour, and I will emerge either happy or clinically depressed, depending on what happens. I'd like to go from humor that before we get into this, I'd like to be sober for a moment. And the choice of a green jacket this morning was not accidental. As any of us know who've looked at television or the like, we are, I would argue, involved in the largest global distance learning moment in history right now. That around the world, literally billions of people are watching unfold a moment of learning. As the child of a family of concentration camp survivors, I only wonder if Twitter and television had been there in the 1930s and 40s, if perhaps the outcome would have been different or faster. But I want to focus very specifically because last evening I received 2 emails from your colleagues, 2 learning colleagues who are in Iran, one in Tehran and one in another city, both of whom have been in very sporadic touch with me over the course of the couple of days. And one of them said, and it hadn't dawned upon me, said, this is what distance learning is about. The opportunity to look and learn from anywhere, to gain content and context from multiple sources, and to apply it to our own world in a way that sometimes is not as disruptive. In other words, we didn't all decide to take a course in political science and the like, and yet we turn on the news, we turn on the internet, and we see that. And so I'd like to dedicate in just a very small and way to think about what's going on there, to think about how the tools of distributed learning are evolving from ones in which we're enrolled in the university to do it, to what many of us always dreamed about, that it would be something that would make the world a place dedicated to learning. And my hope is that we will, as learners, avoid the thought that change and authentic change happens in news cycles, or that we leverage it for our own partisan political purposes, but rather we are seeing unfold, I think, a historic moment. And I only think of, with some great sadness, the memory of Netta, that young university student who went to the field, went to the streets with her professor and father, and died in front of us all. And may it be both a sobering and also inspiring moment for us. Let me talk about and perhaps build a bridge between those two entry points, what my conversation is today, which is about learning changes, learning in uncertain times, and I snuck in a third phrase, reskilling. Now, you're probably either going to be disappointed or excited that this is the only slide that I have, okay? It's a single slide. And it's been interesting. The older I get, the fewer slides that I've been using. And I want to give you a little bit of background behind that, because I also think it's in some ways a metaphor for the conversation. When PowerPoint came out, and it was Harvard Graphics back in the old day, and a number of other programs, I was really excited because, for those of you old enough to remember, before we had this, we did slides in transparencies, and if you were at breakfast before you gave a speech and you wanted to change it, you were totally screwed. Okay, there was no time to do that. In fact, I remember working literally, as I said, for Ziff Davis, and remember getting a thing and saying all your slides are due 4 weeks prior to the speech, and they had to be sent to the slide room, and we literally had a room of people who built our slides. And so PowerPoint was initially a wonderful thing. And one of the things that evolved out of that things is in the early days we didn't know what to do with PowerPoint. In fact, if you sort of remember all the early PowerPoints, they kind of look like kidnap notes. You know, the goal was how many fonts can I use in a single thing. And they were, once again, it was interesting, people were being playful with it. But oh my God, what's happened? Because PowerPoint, if you understand what it is a instructional support tool. It's not instruction. It's a learning support tool, or it's an aid to a speaker. It's not the thing. And so, you know, how many of you, when the speaker comes in and says, well, I only have 42 slides, how many of you are excited? You know, and how many of you get really weird during that process? I had a very intense moment. A few years ago, I was asked to speak at a conference, and I had dinner beforehand with Bill Gates and his wife Melinda, and Steve Jobs, and at the time Steve Case, who had just left AOL. And during dinner, Melinda Gates, who turns to me and says, well, Elliott, you're that kind of e-learning guy. Tell me, what do you think the best tool, the best piece of technology that supports learning is? Now, I was at a really interesting life crisis moment there, you know, because I knew what she wanted. And a little bit of background behind Melinda, and by the way, her and Bill have done incredible things in the world of philanthropy, and now I think have had the courage to say, let's stop what we're funding with K through 12 because we're not sure it's working, and let's take a fresh look at that. But a little bit of background about Melinda. Before she was in that role, she was the product manager, before she started to date Bill, for the annoying paper clip in Microsoft Office. Okay, so she's clippy. That's Melinda. You know, so I had to contextualize what my answer was. And we're eating macaroni salad, and I know I get into trouble. I was not born with the edit muscle. You know, stuff just comes out, and so I look at her and I take a deep breath and I say, Google. And this piece of macaroni goes flying, and she goes, Google, yeah, you know. And this was, by the way, this was a number of years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago. And I said, yeah. She said, well, what about PowerPoint? And I said, well, don't be offended by this, but I actually think PowerPoint should be regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. And she said, why? And I said, because it's the most effective daytime sedative that's ever been invented. Nothing will suppress the learning activity of a group than telling them, well, I only have 42 slides, you know. And it actually triggered this really interesting conversation. And Steve Jobs first was very excited, and I said, well, you know, you've got your own version of PowerPoint. And I got to tell you, those Mac people, they get carried away with their swirls and the like. So you're not exempt from this. But, you know, if we think about PowerPoint as sort of an updated flip chart, we keep it in perspective. But if we think about it, what's happened, and I would argue it is a metaphor for the challenge with learning. that many of us, when we hear we have to make a speech or we have to make a presentation, we focus almost 100% on what the PowerPoint will be. And we don't often focus in on what the experience of our learner will be. Because, in fact, if we did, we probably would reduce our PowerPoint. We would probably think about the role of the PowerPoint. We'd probably, one of the best keys that very few people know is the B key. The B takes the PowerPoint and takes it away, or if you want, you can hit the W key, it makes it white and the like. But, I've interviewed faculty all over the country who don't know about the B key, because they think it'll get in the way of their tenure if they hit the B key along the way. But the reality is, and I think this is the challenge for us in the distance learning field, don't fall in love with our technology. Don't fall in love with our technology. Back at that conference, boy, we were talking about video conference. I was on the research board for PictureTell, and I remember the research paper. Here's what it said, 1993. Within 5 years, every classroom in the United States will have high-speed video conferencing. We'll be able to bring faculty from anywhere. We will break down the barriers, and we will no longer have sage on the stage presentations. It didn't happen. By the way, there's a research report that says that as soon as we brought film strip projectors into the classroom, I remember Honeywell was involved in an early stage in a film strip projector, and they basically said it was going to change learning as we know it. And the reality is that all of these technologies are provocative, but if we focus on them, we get a little bit strange. We fall in love with it rather than backing up and asking ourselves the much more fundamental question, which is, what kind of learning do we want? What are some of the learning changes that we want to build? And I would argue even right now with social media, we're getting a little bit strange. I think it's incredible, and I actually spent about 4 hours yesterday on social media talking to colleagues in Iran and in other places. But at the same time, you'll find people who become, they're identified by it. I literally have been in conversations with people, and they're not looking me in the eye because they want to check their Facebook account, or I'm in a speech, and all they want to do is to Twitter to somebody who is not there. And then you get the ultimate of that, which are the techno-Nazis. And there are literally people who believe they have their one way of doing it. I literally got into an online fight with somebody who said, I have 2 Twitter accounts, one that's sort of the official one that I publish and stream, and then I have another one, not with my Elliott Masie name on it, where I follow some people. And so this one guy posts on his website, Masie of all people has 900 people following him, and he's not following anyone. Bah, humbug, or something like that. So I call him up, pick up the phone, and I call him up. Why are you calling me? You should Twitter me back. I said, well, I decided I would call you. I'm not comfortable with you calling me. Could we do this over Twitter? I said, well, I have you on the phone. What's the problem? He said, you're using Twitter the wrong way. I said, well, I lost my manual. Would you send me the manual? Because I never got the manual. I don't understand that. But once again, we have folks who believe, all they need to do is to get the perfect learning management system, and we're going to have great learning. Well, guess what? There's really sucky learning on excellent learning management systems, and there's awesome learning on organizations that have decided to wait to the year 3000 to get their learning management system and the like. We do not have the luxury of falling in love with our technology. What we've got to think about at a fundamental level is, what do we want to affect? So let me lay out a couple of the learning changes that I think are critical. I think they're happening in front of us. I think they're going to be our challenge, and because most of you work in the higher ed area, I will frame it that way, but I don't want to constrain it, because they also are affecting corporations as they look at learning. They're affecting religious institutions. They're reflecting